Hi again guys, and welcome to the first installment of another brand new series on the channel, another vehicular related series where we're going to spotlight some interesting cars and some ones which maybe some people haven't given much thought to, in a similar way to Unsung Heroes, but this one has a bit of a twist because this is a concept which I have actually touched on before. Way back, I think it was in 2016 or maybe even 2015, but I think it was 2016, I did a countdown of my personal favourite 25 cars in the world, and although a lot of those cars are still among my favourites, their places do change, sometimes quite dramatically, plus there are cars which I didn't love then, which I do now, etc, etc. So I figure, why not update that for 2018, but make it a bit more special? So instead of having like an 18-minute long video that many people won't watch all of anyway, why not actually break it down into a review series like we usually would for instance, Unsung Heroes. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So, over the next 10 weeks, Monday through Friday, starting this Monday, I'm going to be counting down my top 50 favourite vehicles for 2018. And although technically it is of course a series which we could revisit in the future, I don't necessarily think that it will become a yearly thing. That's not entirely necessary. However, there are a couple of things to make it a bit different. The first one is that this list is not my top 50 favourite cars, because for those who don't know, my second biggest passion in the automotive, or motoring world more specifically, is motorbikes. I love motorbikes, so there are going to be motorbikes on this list as well. Some of them very high on the list. Now, if you're not into motorbikes, don't worry, it's not going to be a boring list for you, because out of the top 50 favourites which I have, only 5 of them are actually motorbikes, so you don't need to worry too much about that if you're not into them. However, the second interesting thing that I'm going to do to also change it up a bit and make it more interesting is that only the last 10 on the countdown, my top 10 in other words, are going to be in order. All of the rest are going to be a little more vague, not just to make it interesting, but because my favourites swap around so much that as soon as I release the list, some of them would probably change. So 50 down to 11 are going to be my top 50, definitely, but not necessarily in any kind of exact order. So it gives you some idea of my favourites, but I'm not going to set this car has to be number 47, or this bike has to be number 13, or anything like that. So the last 10 are going to be in order, the rest similarly in some kind of order, but not exact. So to kick us off, first of all, I'm going to give 5 honourable mentions, because we start officially with number 50 on Monday, but now I want to give 5 shout-outs to cars which almost made the list for me, and I know some of these cars are favourites for you guys, and a couple of these were actually very difficult for me to leave off. Number 1 on my honourable mentions is the Bristol Fighter. I love the Bristol Fighter, we talked about it yesterday on the channel in Unsung Heroes. It's one of the fastest and one of the rarest British supercars ever built. Only 13 produced, Viper powered, 210 miles per hour or even more in its higher forms. It's just a cool car. Didn't quite make the list though for me. Secondly, in my honourable mentions, is another favourite of mine, but not quite top 50 apparently, the Covini C6W. I've talked about this car in my Gran Turismo 7 wishlist series. It's a 6-wheeled, rear-wheel drive, Audi-powered, ultra-exclusive supercar. Can do around 190 miles per hour, 0 to 60 in about 4.5 seconds or thereabouts, and I mainly love it just because it's different, but it pulls off being different in a really, I would say, cool-looking way. Almost like a cross between a Koenigsegg CC8S and an Ascari KZ1 with 6 wheels, so pretty cool. But again, not quite good enough to feature in the list, and to be honest, as petty as it may sound, one of the main reasons why is actually because of the interior build quality. It does not look very good from the inside. That lets it down, and after all, these are my favourite cars, so of course it's going to be my parameters, and one of my main parameters is how good a car looks from the inside. Because in real life and in racing games, you spend so much time looking at the inside of a car, what's wrong with wanting it to look good? So unfortunately that prevented the car from being on the list. The third one is one which was in my top 25 years ago but isn't anymore, and was very difficult to leave off the list, the Ford GT40. Specifically the Super Performance GT40. I love the GT40, it's one of my favourite classic shapes, but at the same time, I don't really feel that it any longer belongs in my top 50, so it's actually dropped by a lot, but I do still have a lot of love for it. Top 50 is pretty strict though, so I had to leave it out. Then next up is one of my favourite concept cars, one which I will often say is my favourite of the current breed of hypercars, but just unfortunately wasn't made, the Jaguar CX-75. I adore this car in its concept turbine form, or in the 2-litre crazy overpowered road kind of form. I love it. I think it's a great looking car. I like it more than the XJ220, and I like it more than the LaFerrari, the 918, or the McLaren P1. I think it's a real shame that Jaguar didn't make it. Would have been a great rival to those. Gorgeous looking car. It's a shame. It's a shame that they didn't make it, but didn't make the list for me. And then finally, one which was fairly difficult to leave off the list because of my love for both the car's design and the powertrain, the Renovo Coupe, which some of you guys may not be familiar with, but that's an electric version of the Shelby Daytona Cobra design. It's not made by Shelby, it's made by Renovo, and it's a pretty rapid car. But the reason why I left it off will become clear once we move into the list itself. But suffice it to say that my adoration of the Daytona Cobra, which is one of my favourite classics in terms of design, will not be overlooked, so don't worry about that. But those are my 5 honourable mentions that just didn't quite make the list. So I'll return on Monday with my 50th pick, and then carry on with the series. So of course I hope you guys are stoked for this series. I know I am, to turn it into more of a significant thing than just a one-off video. And until then, I'll see you next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.